Working on toned paper. Let's first take and go through our materials that we're going to take and deal with. What I'm working with today here is charcoal paper. I also work with Canson paper, Fabriano, just about anything. You find that you have to take and do some experimenting, and it's going to take and be determined more about your own interests and your own desire, the kind of images you want to take and make. Now, the other thing is the kind of pencils that you take and work with, or chalks. Now, what I was doing just here a second ago was taking and sharpening this is a Faber-Castell chalk. It's similar to like a Conte crayon. It's square. The thing is that you have to take and sharpen these things. Now, the way to sharpen a piece of chalk like this is to take and start out, if you think first that the chalk is basically a square shape, and you take and you sand off one edge and then the other edge, and you have like a screwdriver. And then I take and once I've got that, then I take and I sand off the other edges, and slowly to a point where I get a very, very nice rounded point like this, where I can make a very, very nice soft tone, or I can make a line. Remember, it's a very, very versatile tool. This is probably my most favorite that I prefer to work with. And of course, this is the same. In other words, you would do the same exact thing if you were working with, say, a Conte crayon, or with any other kind of a hard pastel, or soft pastel even. The other thing I like to work with, well, there's basically three different pencils that I like. They all have slightly different characteristics, and it's something that you have to get used to and to take and experiment and try. One is the Polychrome Faber-Castell, and this is I'm not advertising these things. I'm just, because we have to take and bring out names of them somehow. There's a Prismacolor and an Othello pencil. Now, the differences in these is that this Othello is basically a pastel pencil. So it's a very soft, and it'll take and smear. So you can rub it. Now, that's not a negative statement about it. It has its advantages. The other is that the Polychrome and the Prismacolor are very, very close. It really comes down to a matter of personal choice. What I like about them is this is just the chalk I was using here is basically the same thing, in that what it does is it allows me to take and the Prismacolor does pretty much the same exact thing, as I can take and put a line, I can put a tone down, and it doesn't smear. It's a pretty fixed. It's very similar to the kind of material that was used in the Renaissance. What the Renaissance artists did was they took and used a natural red stone that was quarried, and it was able to take and get down and make a very, very clean, sharp line, and at the same time you could get a tone with it, and it did not smear very much. So, and I found that these are the closest things to it that I've been able to take and work with. Okay, some of the other tools that you take and work with are the stump. Now, a stump really is just a piece of rolled up felt. And what it does is you take, and now here I'm using the Othello to take and put something down here, and then you use a stump for taking, and instead of using your finger, you take and use a stump to take and push this stuff around and create a tone. In fact, you can take this stump, and if you're working say with your sand pad or something like that, actually you can draw with it. So that's a tool. And then just to mention, this is a sand pad. The sand pad is, just what it signifies is that it's a stack of pieces of sandpaper which you can make your own. Okay, another thing that we take and work with is a kneaded eraser. There are several different kinds on the market, and obviously what you can do with it, you can take and knead it up. And it's soft, it's sticky, and it's great because you can take and make any kind of a shape out of it, point, and you can come back in and you can take and start to pick up tones. I can come back in here and wipe things out with this kneaded eraser. Another thing that I use is a regular hard eraser. And what I do with this is, as you notice, I've taken and I've cut this off at an angle. And then I come in and I actually cut niches into this so that the end of it looks like a bit of a rake or some kind of a serrated chisel. And I'll show you exactly what I do with this in a little bit. But it becomes a very, very useful tool for certain kinds of type of drawing. And then, of course, working with a white. Now this is just a Pitt white. Again, it could be just as well a Conti white or a regular, any kind of white chalk will basically work just as well. They all have their slight variances. This is very nice. Again, you notice that it doesn't smear particularly. You can also use a white charcoal. It sounds like a misnomer, but it's what it's going by. Okay. Now, I don't have here any actually black. You could also be taking and working with black. And if you notice, a lot of the drawings I'll be talking about here have black, where we work with two different tones. Now let's just take and talk about some of these drawings first. And we can take and just sort of describe how some of these materials. Okay, first, over here, what we have, now this drawing was a fairly quick sketch, and also it's essentially a monochrome. There's a little bit of red in here, but it's essentially a monochrome drawing. In other words, meaning just one color. And it's done on a pretty rough piece of paper. This is it was actually not a sort of a drawing. It's almost sort of a watercolor paper. It's a Fabriano. It's a very, very rough textured paper. And I was working with a very, very soft piece of charcoal so that the tone, you can see, is very, very loose. And I'm picking and working with the light and just hitting it as I would the light. There's no cross hatching, a little bit here, but essentially it's just put down pretty free. Secondly, now, in the drawing right below it is a good contrast between two distinct sort of styles of drawing. In here, what we have is basically a two-color drawing. And the drawing is done by very, very, very careful cross-hatching of taking and slowly building up the tone with line, going back over one over the other. And I've used two colors in that I've taken, and the skin or the flesh part is essentially worked with a reddish tone, and the hair is dark, in other words, so that the color pretty much goes along with a local color, the natural tone. Now, here, this is done with the kneaded eraser I was talking about taking, and let me show you a little bit here. In other words, this is using that serrated edge. What I've done here is put a tone down first, and I'll show you how to do this in a second, is to take and put a tone down first, and then came back and wiped off with that serrated edge, and it creates sort of a crosshatch effect, and taking and feeling the form. Here in the piece of drapery that we've got, that like the first drawing we looked at here, it's done very, very direct. The only difference here is that the tone is a little, the white has been, it's a little more creamier white. It's put on a lot softer piece of chalk, and the paper itself is a lot smoother. So it doesn't have that coarse, quite a coarse feeling as the other one does. Okay. Now, this was something else now. This was taken and done strictly with vine charcoal. And it's a monochrome, of course. And the white then was taken and come back and just, there's a very minimal use of white actually in the head itself. In contrast to, say, these others that we've talked about, the white here has really been held down. And the form has been built up basically working with the charcoal. The white is used just to take and pull out the form. Now here we have something that's a little different. And in this case, the line and the tone, the dark tone, is done with actually a graphite pencil, which gives it a sort of a silvery quality, and it was rubbed with a stump to take and give us that sort of a very, very soft, smooth feeling to it. And it's very, very strong emphasis on the line itself, so that you can take and it's basically a line drawing with a little bit of tone, and the emphasis being on the light side of the form. Now, we have here the emphasis is primarily now on the light. The shadow side has been left completely alone. A little bit of line, but practically no modeling within that shadow side at all. It is almost completely done with the shadow being the color of the paper itself, and the white chalk is the thing that takes and actually creates the form. There's actually two colors of chalk in here. You'll notice that the line, I have a very strong reddish line that's created in here, and then I've come back and accented it with a darker, sharper tone. Now, on the floor down here, what we have, well, let me just lift this up here where we can see this a little better. What we have here, this was done first using a chamois to take and put a tone in to get the gesture, and then came back in with a compressed charcoal. And this is a very, very quick sketch. It's probably just no more than 5 minutes. Okay, so this is very, very quick, trying to work for the gesture primarily. Now over here on the easel, we have now two different approaches. Here we have, which we've already talked about, a very careful crosshatch type of drawing, and working with a two tones, where we have a red tone for taking and dealing with the skin, and then a dark tone for the hat and the drapery. And next to it we have then is basically a monochrome, working with just the light and a very, very quick, simple sketch, white. Now, one thing that I've done with all of these drawings is that you'll notice that we've talked about so far here is that there has been no mixing of the colors. Now, what we do is we try to think of the paper as being a value that is part of the drawing. So that we've taken, say, a value scale, we would start out with whatever kind of material you're working with, your darkest dark you can get, and then we would take and we would have a gradation of values that we can take and create through here. Okay, keep getting lighter until we blending into the paper. And from there, we take and we pick up, working with the white, so that we have now a complete range of values, and the paper is one of the values in that scale. We also, what we try to avoid, now, when I say avoid, this is sort of, it's always a subjective thing, because I've got a lot of drawings where I've done just where I say don't do. But what you try anyway in the beginning is you want the drawing to have a certain clarity. And so what we try to avoid is taking and doing a drawing where the white and your red start getting mixed in together. Then we take and it creates a muddy tone. And we try to avoid this. We try to create a separation. We try to do what we're doing here. We try to always sort of keep some of the paper between the light and the dark. Okay. Now, what I want to do now is to take and first show you how to take and work. Well, we can do it on here. Let's do it right here. For so many years I've been taking and working with the chamois. I'm always amazed to find out people aren't familiar with the chamois. Now the chamois is the same thing we take and work with when we wash our car. And the first thing you want to do is never wash it. You don't want this thing to be stiff. You want it to always be a very soft thing. Now, what I've done is I've just taken, and this is just a new chamois. I just picked it up on the way to the studio this morning. I've taken from the sand pad, and just as I was working, taking and sharpening my pencil, I use this material to put onto the chamois. Okay, now this becomes a means of taking and creating a tone on the paper. Now I normally would take and do this on a flat surface here. But let's just take and okay, this gives you an eye. What you would do is you would take and cover the whole complete piece of paper. Now, the thing that you have to be careful about, which I didn't really mention when you're buying paper and you're getting the paper, is you want to avoid, well, this is a subjective thing. It's sort of I guess a matter of taste. But what you want to avoid is taking and getting really bright colors. You want to take and work, like I was trying to exhibit here, with the fact that the paper should be an intermediate value, so that you can get darker and you can get lighter, so that this becomes one of those basic values then. Also, you don't want the paper to be too intense a color, too bright a color, because then it'll take and start to fight the drawing that you're taking and working with. So you want this sort of in-between feeling. Now, I mentioned cross-hatching. Cross-hatching is what it means is that you take and you're making a series of lines that take and cross over each other. Now, it's sort of a type of thing that you really have to learn how to take and do it. It takes a lot of practice to be able to take and do satisfactory cross-hatching. In fact, there are certain things in doing it that you should take and avoid. One is that you don't want to take and do cross-hatching where you get this obvious checkerboard feeling. Now, sometimes this works fine if you're doing some kind of an architectural thing. You see a lot of people do use it. On the figure, it tends not to work so well. You always try to take and make your cross-hatching so that you have some kind of an oblique line. So, and also the fact that we try to make this cross-hatching go over the surface of a form. We try to feel the surface that we're drawing, so that if I had a cylindrical form here, I would take and try to make my lines take and work over that surface. Now, the value that you get in here is going to take and be determined by the density of the cross-hatching that you take and put down. How close you start to put these things, how many times you go back over it, and okay. You'll be surprised to find out that when you're taking a look at a lot of the old masters, that they were so used to looking at small reproductions of things. If you look at the originals, you find that a lot of the things that we look like were created with a tone that were actually taken and done by very, very, very careful cross-hatching of the form. Okay, now the sharp pencil, or the sharp eraser that I was talking about, does exactly the same thing I was doing here with the cross. This is used to take and try to go over. I haven't got enough dark enough tone here. I can take a second here and go back to this one I've got prepared here. This is done the same way. You can see these erasures here take and go over that surface of the form. Keep pulling over, over, over. So it's done exactly the same way as I was doing with the dark here. Now, I want to take and draw a little distinction here. Now, between a lot of people take and confuse a drawing this way with, say, working with pastels, doing a pastel portrait. Essentially, the main difference is that here, in the drawing that you've been looking at here, what we're doing is we're taking and essentially working in a monochrome thing. Okay, and here, okay, I've got a dark hat, and I've got a sort of a warm tones, a line for the skin. But essentially, it's still a drawing where I'm taking and building up the form. When you're taking and doing a pastel painting, really what it is, you're doing a pastel painting, what you're doing is you're taking and you're working with different kinds of colors and values to take and try to depict the colors and the values that you actually see. In drawing this way, I'm not doing that at all. I'm taking and retranslating things, working with line, working with tone to build up the form. Now let me show you some other variations here on working with tone paper. Okay, here what we have is basically just a same kind of paper, but I'm working with a watercolor wash, where you can see I've took in a combination wash plus charcoal pencil plus white chalk, takes and brings out the form. This down here is the same thing. This is not the same as that. This is just working with a plain vine charcoal. Now, up here, we have really a different type of a thing. This is a much looser, freer type thing. The tone was first put down with the chamois, and then I came back into that with the kneaded eraser and really wiped out big areas. And in putting in the white, instead of trying to do any kind of cross-hatching or being very careful about how I put that tone down, it was using a broad, thick piece of chalk, and I was really just taking and rubbing that tone into the paper. So you really feel this flow. It's a very, very open type of drawing. Now, the one on the bottom here has somewhat that same approach, except this has a much more rounded feeling, but it was still done in a very loose, free, sort of vigorous type of drawing, a very quick, maximum 5-minute drawing. Okay. Now, what I want to do is to take and do some drawing after some of the old masters. First, let's take and look at Boucher. Boucher, French artist, And if you can see, this is basically monochrome drawings. And he was marvelous in his ability to take and capture the female form. Now, I'm just going to take a little bit of a fragment of this to take and give you an idea in how he worked. Now, all of these guys took and worked sort of similar. There's more similarities between artists than there are differences. Now, the drawing was nowhere near this size. The original was only 9 1/4 by 14 inches, so it was only, the whole piece of paper was only about like this. So I'm blowing up one big piece here. What he did was to take and give a very strong sense of light direction. And he used this paper to great advantage in taking and working with his light. Basically, there's a little bit of line in here, but with taking and trying to show the form in relationship to this back, so he works the light to give us a strong feeling for the light direction from coming up here. He takes and he builds this form, and he goes over this. It's almost would be sort of the effect that you would get in an extreme, would be like if you were working on a piece of black velvet and you were taking and working with white paint. Okay, this is the feeling here. We start to feel that form taking and being built. Very careful cross-hatching, building up this form. Okay. In our next session then, what I'm going to do is to take and go through a few drawings and to try to show the differences of point of view and actually how you take and develop this kind of drawing. Okay. Continuing our drawing with on toned paper here, I want to take and jump right away into doing some drawing after Michelangelo. Now, most of his work, most of his drawings were done for the purposes of taking and having a model to take and paint from. They were studies in themselves. And so as he built these drawings up, now here you can get an idea. I'm working on blue paper, it doesn't matter. Okay. The drawing, as you look at this thing, has a very, very smooth quality to it. Now, let me take and explain how this worked. When he would take and start finishing up a drawing, now we're just going to take and go through this very quickly. Now I'm not going to try to do a very, very completed drawing here. We'll just take and spend a little bit of time on it. The first part of the drawing was done very, very loose, very free. And you can, looking at the drawings, you can see it. Very, very simple, sort of direct feeling, going for the shape. And as you look at the drawings, if you could see the originals of these things, you would see that he did a lot of sort of searching for that form. You would take and feeling where these forms would take and be going. And you notice that there's a certain amount of distortions in them. That it's like he made the heads rather small, made the figures very, very long. And this was done purposefully. It was part of the aesthetic. He was trying to take and create a certain monumental quality. Very direct in the beginning. Okay, now I'm going to take and just work on one section. Just take and start working on this shoulder area. And we get an idea of how he worked by taking and looking at the preliminary stages of the drawings. Like we have a secondary figure in here. You can see very, very clearly how he took and developed the drawing. Now, as he built the drawing up, the drawing was taken and created by working with a very careful cross-hatching, taking and very, very carefully building up the form, thinking of the center, notice what I'm doing here. Now, maybe a little small for you. If I take in, say, looking at this area a little bit larger, we could see this shape in here. What I'm doing is I'm taking and making that tone, those lines basically go over the surface of that form. I'm taking and doing this type of thing. I start out thin, get a little broader, let it out thin. Take and sing. And if I want to make that darker, then I take it and I come back and I start going back over this some more. Okay, so as I'm taking in, just slowly building up this form. Very, very carefully. Slowly starting to accent some of the parts. Now the thing that gives the drawing, as it goes on farther and farther, a feeling of polish or finish to it is precisely that, polish. What he would do, and I'm just, like I say, I'm trying to give here an example of a technique, more or less. As we take and build the form up, working with these crosshatch tones, there still has a feeling of roughness to it. Okay. Now, like I said, what he would do is he would take and come back in and polish this. Well, that's precisely taking and maybe I need to take and go a little bit farther with this a little bit, get a little bit more tone down on it here so that you can see, taking something like this and then coming in and actually rubbing a tone, polishing. See how smooth the thing takes and gets. Starting to just take and do. Now this would be carried to a real extreme. Taking and slowly building this thing up. And in fact, if you go into the literature of the periods, you find that a lot of times the drawings to the collectors had more value if it had this sort of, well, maybe almost really a superficial type of finish to it. It's not the kind of drawings that are always really most valued by other artists. And you can see, if you take a look at certain areas, how he would take and really make these lines come in and curve with the form going over and around the surface. Slowly taking and building this thing up more and more and more. And then he would take and come back and just very, very carefully start to highlight some of these areas where we start to feel the bone taking and coming out. Now I'm working on blue paper. I'm exaggerating these things here a little bit just for a little effect here. So you can start to see taking and working with the white the same way, just building up sort of a crosshatch type of tone. Okay, now I want to take and look at Watteau. Now, Watteau is probably a little more accessible to us in terms of difficulty. Actually, let's take and do a piece of paper here that's a little closer to the color that he would work with. Okay. Again, this is probably not too far off the size of the original. Very free type of drawing. Now, if you look at the secondary figure here to begin with, this really gives us a bit of a clue in how he worked. You can see where he just took the head in a very simple kind of oval type thing that we all are used to seeing, putting in lips for the eyes, coming in the nose, simple cylinder for the neck, and a very, very simple basic shape coming in, trying to get the torso. Okay, this is the general thing. It's not that far removed from what we were looking at the Michelangelo. Now, as I take and work on this drawing, what takes and really strikes me is a strong quality about this is that your first impression, you get the feeling that the drawing is more finished than it really is. Very simple shape in here. Shape becomes the first consideration. Very simplified form. Again, this is probably done as a very quick sketch. Right? Very possibly I'm taking more time doing it than he did. It's a very direct quality to it. Down. Okay. Now what he does in terms of modeling the form now, he takes and we think of as if we were drawing an egg. He has a light source coming from up here someplace, coming down. He takes and he's modeling that head as if it was in tone like this. And the eye sockets are cut in. So he takes and very carefully, he's very careful about drawing the shape. He was obviously looking at a model. The reason I say that is that quite often you find that these artists did not use models. They would be taking and working on drawings, taking and developing things out of their head, and redrawing drawings that were already done. Okay. That silhouette, very lovely shape to this whole eye socket, the eyebrow. But he takes and drops this area into tone. But it's very simplified. Very simplified eye. You have the upper lid. Drops the eye itself into shadow. A little bit of line down the outside of that nose, not too extreme. Gives a good strong cast shadow underneath the nose. Very simplified drawing. The lips, not a lot of detail. It's more of just making sure these things are in the right place. The chin is almost calligraphic in the way it's put on. Just hits that dark underneath the lip and draws a dark tone underneath here to help us get us a feeling there's a shadow in here. And then the tone on the rest of the head here is like what I was talking about this egg. He takes and he works with it as a simple cross-hatching to start with, going across this way to get that thing to turn down. And then the rest of this part here, the neck, is treated very simply with just a series of a few very casual. Now, these weren't very carefully done. They were just very simple little sketched lines to take and get the feeling for where that shadow side. The hair itself is done very free, very loose. It's an ear and here. Good strong strokes. The drawing was done smaller than I'm done here, so it takes me a little bit more to cover those areas. Okay. Shape, very simplified. Okay. Very strong line on the shadow side behind here, really pushing that tone. Very light now coming in here over the bodice here. Again, he uses the line, give us the feeling for a shadow under the side there also. The light side over here is treated very lightly, very free. Some folds going in here, down. He had a marvelous way of handling drapery, particularly stuff that felt sort of silky. And the trick to that is to essentially, as we'll get into this a little bit, is to treat very, very strong contrast, light and dark. Okay. The fingers, what have you, are just very simple, no concern particularly for drawing detail. Thing in there, feel it. Dark side, getting the shadow side going. Okay. Now, he came back into this now with his white. And in the head, he was very careful. First, he just picked up, like as if we were drawing this egg here, he gets that highlight right in there. And he picked the highlight up in the forehead. He picks up the bridge of the nose. Okay. And the cheek. Okay. Tone coming down here behind the neck. And here he starts to kind of get us a feeling like there's some kind of white material in here, besides then the skin. It's lights in here. He takes in some highlights on this drapery. I notice this is in the form, it's a sketch. He had come back here and looked like he had done a little something or other. I'm not quite sure what this was supposed to be. And he had even taken and thrown a few darkish lines into here, trying to do a little something more with the hair. Now, he did quite a bit of stuff, actually, where he worked in two tones. Okay, now what I'd like to do is to take a completely different type of drawing. Now here, where we have very loose, free, sort of a flamboyant drawing, we want to go to Rubens. Now, Rubens worked completely the opposite. It's a very, very famous drawing of his son. Now here, he actually gets the feeling of color to the, of light, I should say, to the drawing. And what he's doing, if you can see this, is to take and have a light, okay, say here is the head, and we have a light coming from up here. He took and used his cross-hatching, and now this is all done extremely carefully with a cross-hatch tone in that area, that half-tone area, transition between the light and the shadow. And he kept the whole area of the light basically in light tones, and then in the shadow side he came in and worked with a darker tone, which gives it the feeling, if I just sort of a cool shadow, in contrast to this warmer tone that we're going up here. So if you look at the drawing, you can see this very, very warm area here to the very, very cool area where the blacks are taking and coming in here. Now, okay, let's take and draw a little bit from this then to show a little bit how precise it, because it's an unusual drawing, not unusual I should say, it's for today. People have a tendency to take and classify drawings one way or the other, to take and see them as either tonal drawings or linear drawings. Well, if we look at Rubens here, we find that it has both these characteristics. On the one hand, it's definitely has a feeling of a tone. We look at this, we see tone. When you come down and start to get right down to it, you see that he's been extremely precise in taking and delineating with line every little form that's there. Most people have a difficult time in taking and drawing children because they take and, as they're drawing them, they take and put in all of the little lines and all the little wrinkles that you take and see. Now Rubens, he drew every little wrinkle and every little line that he saw, but he did not allow anything to become any more important than it actually was, which is really the whole trick to the game. Now, he took and handled the hair with both warm and cool light. Now, I don't know if I mentioned, this was his son that he was actually drawing. And really, the drawing was about the size of the reproduction here. Okay, now, what he did, and I'm not sure if this is going to be easily seen here, is that in modeling these forms, all of the tones are created with a very, very subtle crosshatch. For people who have a difficulty in taking and slowing down, in being disciplined, this is an excellent way to take and work. You cannot hurry this type of drawing. Working over actually coming down to a very clear line. He draws all of the folds in the eye. Cheek is all built up. I'm not going to have time here to take and carry this completely through, but I want to take and get part of this so you can start to feel a sense of how this tone is built up. You can see everything is very deliberate. I'm trying to go with the surface. Okay, as I going around, feeling the light sources coming from up here. Now, as he started going around the form here, this is where he took and worked into his darker tone. And this is done the same way. Now, slowly integrating that cross-hatching. Slowly building. Now, another thing that he does here, to point out, that takes and makes us feel the sense of luminosity in the drawing, is how he takes and captures that light in between darks. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm creating a dark band that takes and comes down through here. And we have then this light area here, basically the reflected light. He comes in here and gives a very strong, sharp, clear line, and here. And what we get then is this very, very strong feeling of the reflected light that's being built up. And essentially what I would do in this case is I would use the paper in here as the value for that reflected light. Now you have to be careful in doing this cross-hatching that it remains so subtle that we never become very, very conscious of the cross-hatching itself. What we want to see is the tone, not the cross-hatching. We want to feel the tone that is being created. I hope this is dark enough that you actually can see some of this, because it's very, very subtle. Now, as we go, the idea of using this as a shadow side is carried through even into the eye socket here. And we feel, first he gets these lines, and these are fairly strong, vigorous lines that he takes and puts in here, where we feel this eye socket starting to take and pull in. Then he has some extremely fine, subtle little tones that take and build Okay, I hope I've been able to take here and give you a little bit of the flavor of taking with more toned paper. Obviously, as you look around at some of these drawings, you can see that it can be done in a lot of different ways. And the thing that you have to sort of keep in mind is that you've got to control your values. You have to develop the skill and the sensitivity of feeling that surface and feeling that form and not allowing things to get away from you.